Fiore Artisan olive oils and vinegars.
Thanks, Becky. And they're going to adjust this volume in and out, so I'm either going to have to talk lower than I normally do, or I don't know. But I'll let them worry about that. So my name's Pat O'Brien, and a little story that I told some people on a foodie tour up in Bar Harbor yesterday. They said, "Where does Fiore come from?" I said, well, think about it. If you walked up to the store and you saw O'Brien's Artisan olive oils and vinegars, you're probably not coming in. So Fiore, Fiore in Italian means flower, but it can also be used to connote blossoming. And so back in 2009 when we started the business, or earlier than that in 08 when we were doing all the investigation and research, our daughter Deidre down in Miami, who's in communications, and Nancy got together and started playing with words, and so Fiore was the name that came. So thank God for that. As Becky said, we started. I'll get used to this in a minute, so don't mind me. We came to Maine. We're from away. We'll always be from away, and that's okay. We came to Maine, 2004 on vacation. I was big into sea kayaking at the time. Just met Nancy, and we started dating and came up to Mount Desert Island. And the next year we came back, and then I think it was the following year, 06, we bought this little house in the woods up in Bass Harbor. It's down the Marsh Road. So the abutters on one side are Acadia National Park, so I think we're good. We're in a little quiet place, big trees. It's just a nice place. So we decided we wanted to stay, and for all these reasons, the people are great, the area is beautiful, and it was time for us to get off the road. I did a lot of work in the printing and packaging industry for consumer products companies. So my role was to go around the world and make sure that spirits, wine, and beer brands were printed consistently from Asia to South America, North America, and so on, Europe. Did a lot of traveling. So we came back up, and we decided one of these days we're going to have to stay. So what did we have to do? And mind you, this was 2008 when, for many people, the sky fell legitimately. But there was a lot of skepticism, and so Nancy and I stopped watching TV and reading the newspaper and said, "This is what we're going to do." So we identified what we were going to have to be up against, and how do we go from, this corporate life to running a little retail business that neither of us had any experience in. What were we really looking to do? And that was get off the road and settle in. We had gotten married in 2008 up in Northeast Harbor, and we said, "This is it. We've got to be happy, and this is a place to do it." So, one of the things I had met an importer many years ago that had an idea that wouldn't it be great if Americans could go into a shop and taste olive oil or balsamic vinegar and then make a decision on whether or not they wanted to buy it. Because as you know, everywhere else that you go, pretty much typically, you have to base your buy-in on the label and what it says. So wouldn't it be great? So I thought, this was years and years ago when I met this person, and I thought, well, that's a good idea. But I had work to do in my printing career, so I said, good luck with that. Came back around and said, we're going to be in Bar Harbor, and there's 3.5 million people that show up here every summer. So I think we could probably make this work. So it hadn't taken off after about 5 or 6 years since I met this man. And I said, okay, we'll give it a shot. So we knew we needed a year-round business, so we set up a website right away, and we used a lot of our business connections to try to help support us. We identified that it was going to be a tasting room. It was going to be retail, and so Nancy set to developing a really solid business plan. But this all happened from sort of May of 2009 to July. We had pretty much given up on the idea back in 08, early 09, that we couldn't find a place. We had the idea we wanted to do the business, but we couldn't find a spot up there. And in May of 09, we got a call from a realtor that we had been working with, and he said, hey, there was a place that just went out of business, or they decided to move. I've got a spot. Why don't you come and look at it? Literally, I had 1 foot in my kayak on Long Pond up there, and Nancy said, let's go. And so we went, we found the place, and so in May, there's Nancy sitting out in front of what was the Acadia Clipper hairstylist, and we went in and looked around and thought, wow, this is going to take a lot of work, but we did it, and in July of 09, it was literally Memorial Day weekend when we went in there and committed to this. And July 10th of 09, we opened the store. And that week, I had to go on a business trip because Nancy had taken a leave of absence from her career. I was still working, and I got word that I had to be in a meeting in Singapore for 10 days, and so I had to go. And so she had to open the store. Her daughter came up from Miami, and off she went. And there she is. Like Becky said, in 2013, we were named the Woman-Owned Small Business of the Year for the state of Maine by the SBA. So she's done a really good job. What did we have to? We had to learn this business because I was a printer, Irish heritage, so I didn't use a lot of olive oil or balsamic vinegar. And I mean, my mother made great spaghetti, don't get me wrong, but we weren't tuned into this. So I set out to find out more. We did. There's on whatever this is, the left or the right, I can't tell right now, but I'm meeting with the president of the consortium in Modena that handles all the balsamic vinegar to learn a little bit more about the balsamic vinegar. This is a good friend of ours. Becky probably recognized him, Gianluca Tumadei. He's the miller in the area of Brisagala. He's the miller for all the farms in that area, and he's got 13,000 trees on his land, and so he became one of our mentors and teachers about what balsamic vinegar and extra virgin olive oil is all about. This was another one. I met this man, Tom Mueller, in California in 2012. Tom wrote a book called Extra Virginity, The Scandalous World of Extra Virgin Olive Oil. And it's an interesting thing because he's sitting there smiling. He splits his time between Liguria in Italy and New York. He's a writer for the New Yorker magazine. He's written a couple of different books, but this one exposed a lot of the fraud that was going on in the olive oil business in Italy. And so he's had his windows smashed a couple of times and things like that, but he's still smiling. And the book, we happen to sell it at the store. It's a great book, and it gives you a lot of good information about what extra virgin olive oil is, what it's not, the fraud stories and things like that. But it's like my Bible, I guess, at this point. Extra virgin olive oil, we had to understand what the fruit was all about, what different types. There's 1,800 different varietals of olives that are used to make either olive oil or table olives around the world. And Gianluca, here he is. This is back in 2013, and we're tasting, and he's teaching us about the differences between this year's oil, oil that was pressed last year, different varietals, that kind of thing. So there's just a lot that we had to learn. This is an example. These are trees in Leone Conti's. She's all familiar with these things. And Leone Conti is a good friend of ours. You'll see a picture of him in a bit. But these trees are 25 years old right here. So Leone's been making olive oil for a while. This tree is about 150 years old. So, and they're still making olive oil from that. Nancy and I were up in San Leolino in Tuscany. These are friends of ours that we met in Rockland. He's a, how should I put this? He's the ship captain of the Windjammer Stephen Tabor, Noah Barnes. His sister has lived in England with her husband and kids for about 25 years. 2 years ago, they bought a villa down in San Leolino in Tuscany, in the Chianti region. And so we went over and saw them, and they've got 800 trees, and this is a 200-year-old Moriolo olive. And I just met with her last week. She came into the store in Rockland because she's over visiting. She's got these trees back in line, and we're going to be part of the harvest in October. And hopefully we'll be able to connect and bring some of her oil in. Olive fruit is, this is an example of an Arbasana. Arbasana happens to be a Spanish olive. They're different shapes and sizes. This one, yeah, you can see this. This gives you an idea of Italy, for example. The southern part and Sicily is really where most of the olive oil comes from. There's a lot that comes from up in Toscana and Umbria, up in this area, but not as much as in the south. We buy ours where Gianluca is up here in Emilia-Romagna. And so there's not a lot of olive oil that gets produced there, but it's really good olive oil. So I'll tell you a little bit about how olive oil is made. And oh, by the way, this is interactive. We can wait till the end to have questions, or if you have questions, fire them out. Now we'll deal with them along the way. It's all up to how you want to do this. In the old days, olives were harvested by hand. They were put into a large stone trough and ground with a millstone that was attached to an animal, ox, cow, donkey, horse. And that animal would walk around in circles. The olives would be in this trough. The millstone would be going around. You'd be working the olives in. You'd end up with this big, pasty liquid. They'd take burlap mats, and they'd act like sponges. So they'd throw these burlap mats into the liquid. There would be, as you can imagine, it's milky. It's got the flesh of the olive in there. They take these mats and they put them into the trough, and those absorb all the oil. And then they take those out, they stack them up, and they crank a press down on them. They squeeze the oil out of them into a bucket. They take the bucket and pour it into a big cauldron, and then they fire it up, and what happens is the oil rises, and they take the oil away. That was the old way. And here's an example of what the trough looked like, the millstone, the burlap mats. There's the press. They would stack these mats up and crank them. So how does that work? They don't do that anymore. Occasionally you'll find in some of the little towns, they'll still have a frontoio. The frontoio is the olive press. They'll still have a frontoio set up so that they can do demonstrations of this, and they keep the old ways sort of alive. But it's almost more museum-like than not. So because what they found was in that process of, the animal walking around, everything's exposed to the air, the heat from the cauldron separating the oil from the water. You always got good oil that tasted pretty good, but the heat was damaging all the nutrients. So you ended up with this nice flavorful oil, but it really wasn't as nutritionally beneficial as you'd like it to be. So over the course of time, with technology and more health science and that kind of thing, equipment's been developed to do this properly. Keep the air out, keep the temperature at a 86 degrees is the temperature that the oil starts to separate from the paste. But you can see here the olives are cleaned. It's a double grid hammer crusher. That sounds like a mouthful, but it's a machine that just crushes up the olives. Pits and all, in most cases. There are some olive oils that are made what they call dinocciolato, where they take the pit out of the olive first and then they crush the olives. The olive oil tends to be smoother. It may last a little longer, but it's more expensive because of the work that's involved in getting the pits out and not damaging the fruit. So most of the olive oil, probably 96, 7, 8% of the olive oil that you find, extra virgin olive oil, is pits crushed in it as well. And that contributes to the length of time that it'll, the life expectancy that it has. Extra virgin olive oil, from the time they make it, has about a 20 to 24 month lifespan. It's a fruit juice. It degrades with air. It oxidizes, and there's nothing that you can do about it. You don't put it in the refrigerator. Put it in the refrigerator, the fats will congeal. The only thing that does is now you have to take it out and leave it on the table and wait a couple hours until it liquefies again. But you haven't done anything to extend the life of the oil. So grind it all up. The paste goes into a malaxer, it's called. It just warms the oil to 86, or the paste to 86 degrees. And then it starts to separate. It goes through a centrifuge. Yes?
Would you explain what virgin olive oil is and extra virgin?
Yes, you're a good segue into the next couple of slides.
Okay.
I'll show you graphically what that means. Anyway, so centrifuge, decanter, now you have the oil. So let's go through that a little bit. These olives have been washed and they're going into a crusher, a little backwards. This is how they typically harvest the olives now. The thing that these guys have in their hands is like a weed whacker, but it's got a claw on it, and it reaches up and they grab a branch, and then they flip the switch and it sits there and shakes the tree, and the olives fall down onto a mat. A lot of them will do that. Some of them still do rakes, that they go through the branches of the trees and pull the olives down that way. So into the process they go.
Question?
Yes.
Is there an emphasis on organic olives now or not?
Olives are grown pretty much organically as a default. There's not a lot of sprays used, and most of the farmers cultivate in an organic way. Italy, for example, it costs 5,000 euros a year, and you have to pay that for 5 to 7 years before you're ever certified as organic. The man has to come and inspect your documentation and all this stuff. You're going to throw $5 grand at him every year, and so not too many people do. My friend, like Gianluca, the Frantoio that you saw there, he's got 13,000 trees. He grows his trees organically, but he's not paying them to come out. Leone, on the other hand, this was very important to him. His wine, his vineyards were certified organic 10, 12 years ago. And he had that, but he wanted his olive oil to be certified, so he went through that process. I think it took him 6 years. So last harvest, he was certified. But he still has to keep paying every year for this guy to come out and do this thing. So, yeah, so that's one of those. So this is well, here's a centrifuge. Looks pretty industrial. Everything's spinning around in there. And then the decanter, the oil, this just happens to be nice green oil with gold tones to it. And if you've never had that, I have to say this is the best that just reaching in at the bottom of the decanter and just having it, it was wonderful. Yeah, fresh extra virgin olive oil. So, to those questions you had. Extra virgin olive oil is really one thing. It's the first crush of the fruit. All of our growers, they'll do what they call early harvest. It's when the olives are still unripe or green in most cases. They crush the olives when they're still green. You get the most flavor and the most intensity of the health benefits like polyphenols and antioxidants and oleic acid and things like this. There's certain thresholds that have to be met to classify as extra virgin olive oil. So the oil goes to the chemical lab, they analyze it based on these different thresholds, and then it gets approved as classified extra virgin olive oil. And one of the key elements is the free fatty acids. 0.8% is the magic number that the International Olive Council set many years ago as that's the place where above that it's virgin. So there's really only two classifications of olive oil: extra virgin olive oil and virgin olive oil. I look at it as it's extra virgin olive oil and it's not. And because what you'll find, quite frankly, in the grocery stores is you'll see different labels like virgin, pure, light, all this. It's not extra virgin olive oil, it's something else. So, excuse me. So that's kind of the characteristic. The one thing after the chemical analysis, it goes to a tasting panel. There's certain identified flavor defects that if the tasting panel were to find a flavor defect, like one of the common ones is musty, it smells musty. If they sense that, even though the chemical criteria has been met, it gets bounced. It can't be extra virgin olive oil. So it has to meet the chemical criteria, and it can't have any flavor defects. Yes.
Well, you just answered the question about defects. What are defects?
Defects are, there's a whole wheel, and I didn't bring it with me, but it's musty, fusty, vinegary. There's all sorts of, earthy, dirt, it's all, so there's identified, yes.
I understand that a lot, like in Italy, in these containers, that they use that for their everyday cooking. Would that be virgin oil?
No, it's extra virgin olive oil.
What's the question?
The question was,
In that big container?
big tins of extra virgin olive oil that the Italians use every day, are they cooking with that? Is that virgin oil or is it extra virgin
So
oil?
they're all?
It's extra virgin olive oil.
Okay.
They love, so here's a little bit about all that. The Italians consume more than they can produce. I mentioned there's 1,800 different varietals of olives around the world. There's 800 different ones in Italy, all across Italy. But the Italians, they consume more than they can actually produce. So for years, decades, they've been buying oil from Spain because Spain is the largest producer of extra virgin olive oil by a factor of 10 over Italy, Greece, Portugal, and so on. So what happens is the Spanish extra virgin olive oil comes into Italy and they put it in a bottle there and they send it over here and it's a product of Italy because that's what it is. If they can put it in the bottle there, they can call it a product of Italy. It doesn't delegitimize the oil, and that's what they got fingered with in the last couple of years. It was, oh, the Italians are fraudulent, they're calling it a product of Italy, but it's actually from Spain and it's coming, but it's great extra virgin olive oil and Spain happens to make 10 times more than anybody else. So, not to say that there wasn't fraud going on, but just the simple fact of the Italians buying extra virgin olive oil from Spain, putting it in a bottle in Italy, and then exporting it to America as a product of Italy is fine.
All right, so my next question is, you will see blends, and it'll say on the bottle, Greece, Turkey, Spain, So are those quotes still all extra virgin oils when they say they're blended?
There's a couple of things. You could have extra virgin olive oil that was made in Greece, Spain, Portugal, Turkey, Tunisia, and then a company like DeLeo, the big olive oil conglomerate, they buy this and then they put it together. They blend it. If the flavor of each of those, when it comes together, they don't like, then they warm it up and that kind of neutralizes some of the flavor. So it could have been extra virgin olive oil when they began, they put it together, but then it never gets tested again. So this is kind of like a side story, and but 5 or 6 years ago, the California Olive Growers Association got together, and it was all about, they did a big study through the University of California at Davis, and they studied all these imported oils from all over the Mediterranean, southern hemisphere, and everything else that were in the grocery stores in California. They evaluated them against the extra virgin olive oil standards. 96% of them didn't make it, but the label said extra virgin olive oil on it. So they got together and went back to Washington to lobby. I can't remember whether it's the FDA or what body it is that would regulate this, but they were moving for a label change. They wanted to get the labeling laws changed so that the imported olive oil had to meet certain standards, like it had to have the harvest date on it, because the harvest date is very important, because from the harvest date, if you know it's 2 years that oil is good for, then you can do the math and from that harvest date. But if they put the best buy date on there, they can put 2 years out, but when did they put the oil in the bottle, when was it made, all that kind of, that's a little dodgy. So they went back there, they lobbied for it, it went well for their hearings and everything, they came away with a pretty good feeling, and then from what was reported, then that governing body got lobbied by the people that are bringing the oil in, and they said, yeah, you don't want to have to do that because of this and that and that, so we got better things to do, was the end, and so it never happened. So what the Olive Growers Association California did was they went back, and so now if you produce extra virgin olive oil in California, and California's the largest producer in America, but they can only satisfy about 1% of the demand that we all have. So if you produce it in California and you sell it in California, it has to have the harvest date, it has to have a lot of these other things. So they're doing it for themselves, you know. But so there's California olive oil that comes here, and there's a couple of suppliers that are legit. And so what I typically tell people is, when you go to the grocery store, if you can't find a Fiore store in your neighborhood, and we ship everywhere every day, we're online, all that. If you can't find what you want to do is buy your extra virgin olive oil in a green glass container or a tin. Never buy it in anything that's clear, and never plastic. The best oil that you'll find is in the green glass bottles or the tin, and then you have a fighting chance of knowing that it's legitimate extra virgin olive oil.
Why the color? I guess it just, this is the light degraded or something like that?
Yeah, and what happens is, again, they studied these things. When extra virgin, it could be legitimate, good quality extra virgin olive oil that went into a clear glass bottle and then got shipped, and then it goes out onto the grocer's shelf. The lights, the UV wavelength in the light will attack the nutrients in the juice. Within 10 days, they're not as good as they were when they went in. So that's the kind of reality of how that works. So the where isn't important. So many people, I love Italian olive oil, I love Greek olive oil, I love Chilean olive oil, we've got some really nice ones now. But it's not about where it came from, it's about when. So it's like that harvest date. So what we do, we chase the crush. So from October to December, the northern hemisphere harvest occurs all over the Mediterranean, California, North Africa. We get that oil by December into January and February, and we have that oil all the way through just about this week. And now, then the southern hemisphere, so South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, Chile, Argentina, Peru, Uruguay, those countries harvest from the end of April till the middle of July. And so we start getting that oil now. So we've already gone through 25 or 30 different samples from all these growers all over the world, and we've selected 8 to 10 that we're going to bring in bulk. So our Chilean and Australian oil is already here. The South African oil is getting on the water next week, so it'll be here in a couple of weeks. We'll have that oil until probably February, March, and then we'll start to get the Northern Hemisphere harvest again. We'll go over to Italy like we did with Becky in October. We'll see Gianluca, we'll make the buy there, and then we'll have that. So we, even though if we only sold Italian olive oil, we'd be fine because every year we get it, so that's 12 months. It's not, and the oil will last 24. We could be satisfied with just doing Italian olive oil all the time. But because we can access this fresher oil within 6 months, that's what we do. And it's back to that cooking thing. Extra virgin olive oil, you want to cook with this. You can cook with this. The fallacy is that, oh, the smoke point is too low. The reason that that's so widely promoted is because most of the oil that is available commercially is old, or it's been adulterated with something else maybe. Not always, but in 9 times out of 10, if it was extra virgin olive oil, it's probably old if it's smoking. So because you can cook with extra virgin olive oil at 350, 375, something like that, you know. So the higher temperature, like we've got avocado oil that'll take a 500-degree temperature, you know. But the Italians that I'm familiar with, they love fresh extra virgin olive oil and they use it all the time. They cook with it. The one thing that I learned that I didn't know, at Stefano's cooking class we went to, he told me, he said, okay, chop these vegetables up and now you're going to saute them. So I throw the oil in the pan, I turn the burner on, I'm sitting there going on. He's like, what are you waiting for? I said, well, I'm waiting for the oil to get up. He said, no. Put the oil in, put all the vegetables in, then turn the heat up and let them live together, and they'll like each other, and they'll get the flavor, and you know. So that's it. But it's true, you know. You just bring the heat up slowly, and then the flavors are better. You get more flavor out of the oil that way. You get more flavor out of the food that way, and so on. So, yeah.
Question. Should we be looking for an extraction date on the container so we know how fresh it is?
Yeah, it would be the harvest date, because the typical thing about the harvest is, and there's so much to cover, but I didn't. When you pick the olives, you need to get them into the crusher within hours. The law says, the International Olive Oil Council says you have to be in the crusher within 24 hours. Most of our growers are in 6 or less, because like with Leone, he lives on the other side of the hill from Gianluca, but he's got 1,200 trees. He can only harvest 100 a day. So he sets up a schedule with Gianluca saying, I'm starting at 4 o'clock in the morning, I'll have 100 trees harvested by 11 o'clock, I'll be up at your place by 12, and you're going to crush them by 3. And that's the way this thing works. And so the faster you can get the olives into the crusher, the better the oil will be. The peroxide level, the oxidation level is what's affected by that. But so the extraction, the harvest and the extraction is happening in the same date. So most people, they don't put the extraction date on, they'll put the harvest date on it, you know.
So if your bottles, for example, would have a harvest date on them?
We don't put anything on. We have that on the display when it was harvested and everything else, but it's not on the bottles, you know, because every bottle is an individual. We label them individually, but on our website, when you come into the store, the description that is on these extra virgin olive oil says when the harvest was. Yeah. All right. Gotta move on, Maggie. Expiry dates, we talked cooking with that. Free fatty, there's a lot of science, but these are the different levels of criteria that, and unfortunately you don't see these on the labels. on the big commercial brand, they don't put this. We do, because we get it right from the suppliers, right from the growers. They have to send to the labs before we'll accept the oil. So how our thing works is we get a sample right after the harvest, and we might taste it, but we need to have the chemical analysis right away so that we can prove that this is what that is and so on. And so we don't accept anything without certification and that kind of thing. So that was all of it.
We have about 5 minutes for balsamics.
Okay. Any questions on olive oil?
What is the best olive oil for like salads, or, I know it would be virgin oil, but is there a certain kind that would be a little lighter?
What's the question?
What the question is, what's the best olive oil for salads? It's a hard question because if you want a mild, it depends. I mean, if it's like arugula, you know, bitter greens or something, just use a mild olive oil because you want the flavor. If you want the flavor of the bitter greens, you want to transform the flavor into something else, then you use a more robust extra virgin olive oil. And then after that, then you can get into all the flavored oils, you know, the lemon and basil infused and all these different infusions. So it's kind of like use your own imagination kind of thing. That because from a health benefit, they're all made from good extra virgin olive oil, you know. So, Aceto Balsamico di Modena. Modena is the center of the universe for balsamic vinegar. It's in the Emilia-Romagna area, which is right there. Like Becky said, that's where all the good fruit comes from. Bologna, Modena, Parma. So the Ducal Palace is it's now a military school, but the Ducal Palace was where the Este family lived in Modena. And in 1142, the Benedictine monks documented how the balsamic vinegar was being aged up in the attics in the Ducal Palace, as an example. In those days, hundreds of families, basically everybody that had a vineyard in their backyard was making balsamic vinegar. They'd age it in their attics, and so that continued. Right now, there's only about 80 or 90 families in the Modena area that are still doing it the traditional way. So, Modena, just as a reference, Luciano Pavarotti came from Modena. He loved balsamic vinegar. They put a nice statue up in the center of the town this past. So there's a Consorzio tra Produttori di Aceto Balsamico Tradizionale di Modena. This is the this is the consortium that governs the production and assessment of the balsamic vinegar. So it's produced from Trebbiano grapes. The grapes are, if you made wine from Trebbiano grapes, you'd be drinking white wine. So what they do with the Trebbiano grapes is the most prevalent varietal of grape in the Emilia-Romagna, Modena area. So they crush the grapes as though you were going to make wine. But instead of letting it ferment into alcohol, you pull the skins and the seeds out, and then they immediately cook the juice. They simmer it for about 30 hours. And it just simmers in a big cauldron. And my friend Davide Lenardi at the Villa San Danino, he's a fourth generation producer. The villa has been producing balsamic vinegar back into the 1800s. So what they do is they cook the juice. This happens end of September into October. They cook the juice, they store it. He stores it in big stainless steel tanks from October until February. Let's see if I can get here. Trebbiano grapes. Okay, February, up in the attic we go. Let's see, we've cooked the juice. I'm sorry to bounce around, but I want to get to the good stuff. So la batteria. The batteria, or a battery, is where this juice gets stored. So let's say we were going to start from the beginning, and one of the traditions was when a female child was born to the family, it would start a batteria for her. And that would carry on until she got married. It would go off as part of her dowry. So the batteria is this 5 barrels. The largest one holds about 50 liters, the smallest one holds about 10. They lay on their side like this, so in February, we go up, we take the cooked juice that we've stored in the stainless steel tank, and we fill all the barrels up to about 90% of their capacity. It's got a vent in here, and we put cheesecloth over it. So we fill them all up, put the cheesecloth on, and leave it. It goes through the spring, the summer. When it's summer up in the attic, this is up in the attic, and it's very hot. There's no temperature control or anything. Very hot. A lot of fermentation activity, evaporation, all of this. You go through the next grape harvest, crush the grapes, cook the juice, store the juice. February, we go up into the attic, and we look in this little barrel. There's been about 10% evaporation during that summer. So we top that one off from here, the second from the third from the fourth from the fifth, and then we put this year's cooked juice into the big barrel. And then we leave them. Spring, summer, harvest, cooked juice, February back up there, top it off, top it off, top it off, top it off, leave it. 12 years, minimum. 12 years. Now you can understand why no one's starting this business now, because there's... So, and unfortunately what happens is that as time goes on, the next generation doesn't want to do this. So in the case of my friend Davide, he doesn't have any children. So my wife tells Davide last year, you have to adopt Pat. And so we're working on it. We're working on that. So here's my friend Davide, and here we are up in the, I go over every February and I work with him. He's pulling some juice from the little barrel, because after 12 years you can start to take the juice from the little barrel. And he takes it from the little barrel about 10%, and then tops it off, tops it off, tops it off, tops it off. This year's cooked juice into the big barrel, and he leaves it.
This is specific to balsamic.
This is the Chetto balsamic. This is traditional balsamic vinegar.
Okay.
So this is the traditional balsamic vinegar. So the long process, very time consuming and all that. He has probably 60, 70 batteria in his attic up there. So he's a medium-sized producer. So when he takes that juice from the little barrel in that 12th year, he brings it to the consortium. The consortium has to evaluate it. They approve it, and then they put it in the little bottle. And they bottle it in a little bottle like this. It's 100 milliliters. It's the only way that traditional balsamic vinegar leaves Italy, is in a little bottle like this.
Give them an idea of price.
Okay, so minimum of 12 years. Minimum of 12 years. The juice that comes from that minimum of 12 years is $90 for 100 milliliters. This one is a minimum of 25 years, because as you go, the process keeps going, 13, 15, 18, 22 years, and so on. This one is a minimum of 25 years. It takes another designation. It's called extra vecchio, or extra old. So this one is $135 for 100 milliliters. The thing about this is, the traditional balsamic is, you don't cook with that. You use that at the end. You use that with Parmigiano Reggiano cheese, strawberries, grilled meats, grilled vegetables, just a little bit of, and I've got it here so you can taste it. So, but you don't cook with that. You cook with the other, the balsamic vinegar or Modena IGP, which is 35% of that and 65% of aged red wine vinegar. They put those two together and they age that together for 90 days. And then in a bottle, that's this. A bottle like this is $17. And this is almost 4 times the volume of that. But this has aged red wine vinegar in it. And it's meant to be, that's why they produced it that way, is because this takes a long time. And it's special. I open a bottle like this Extra Vecchio, and it'll go for probably 6-7 months. My wife and I with cheese, just to use it the way you do. The other one, you know, you cook with it, you make marinades with it, you put it on salads. It's wonderful, but it's the condimento, that one. Oh yeah, this is quick story. I mentioned that Davide is a fourth generation producer. The villa's been there since the late 1800s. During World War II, the family that was living in at the Villa Sandonino, the Sandonino family, they fled. They were Jewish. When the Germans came from the north, Mussolini let the Jewish people go to the south, and as the Allies came up, the villa went vacant. It got occupied. The joke in Davide's family is that the occupiers thought it was bad wine. So they found these batteria up in the attic. And so when Davide's grandfather got the vineyards going, it took him about 2-3 years, but there was still juice. I mean, you can imagine it was still evaporating the whole time, but no one was topping them off. But there was still juice in there. And one of the little things you pick up is that the barrel maker, when they make the barrels initially, they stamp the year in them. These barrels had 1870s in them, stamped in. So the juice that was in there was pretty much started back then. And so they added to it. And to this day, he's got 2 batteria up in the attic. These are in the attic of the house. The other attic is in a side building. But this is in the attic of the house. And that was a few years ago. He let me do the first extraction for that year from the old barrel from his grandfather. So it was a pretty special thing for me. But that's what we call Reserva Oro, the gold reserve, and he gets about 50 bottles of that, and that bottle will go for about $285. And he gets 50 bottles, and we sell about 10 of them, and we're his only American outlet for the Villa Sandonino. We're proud of that. There's Davide, and that's us getting ready in February. It's very cold up there in February. So this, I mentioned the tradition of the young girl, the baby to the family. Well, I didn't catch this right, but my granddaughter down in Rhode Island she just turned 10. 4 years ago, I finally saved up the money. I bought these barrels, and I buy the juice for them, and I do this every year. I go over in February. This is my batteria for my little granddaughter. And so here I am. Kate, he told me to take a little taste of it. This is the 4th year that we've been doing this. And so the way I have it timed is that when she graduates from high school, it'll be the 12th year. And so we're going to go over and pull. So I've got about 8 years to go on this. But yeah. And just as a reference, this batteria, that's Pierce Brosnan's batteria. I found this out last. So I guess I'm in good company. This, yeah, you can't see it, but this is the one here. I mentioned how there's families that they can't go on because the next generation doesn't want to, or they can't. So this family contacted Davide a couple of years ago and said, I can't do this. This man is about 85, 86 years old. I can't do this by myself anymore. Will you buy some of my batteria? And so I think Davide bought 5 or 6 of them. And when he brought them over, and with the juice in them and everything, this barrel says 1512. Wow. And it's a legit barrel that was made in 15. The juice is in 15, from 1512 because they changed it out. But the barrel, they never throw these barrels away. Unlike wine and things like that, they want these. And you can see this little saucer down here is because the wood expands and contracts all the time, and it'll develop a leak. And then it'll seal itself because of the sugars from the balsamic. So yeah, and there you go. So Bar Harbor, Rockland in 2010, Lewiston in 2012, Freeport in 2013, Brunswick 2016, up at Tiller and Rye in 2016. Come in and taste for yourself.
The butcher here in Riverside.
Yes, Riverside Butcher. We started working with August Avantaggio at the Riverside Butcher back in the spring. So he's got I think three or four oils, 3 or 4 balsamics of ours in there. We pre-bottle them up in Rockland, I bring them down, but there's a little taster bottle there if you want to taste them. And the thing to know is if you're familiar with us, and let's say, for example, he doesn't have the pomegranate balsamic, but you want it, you just go in there and you say, hey, August, I want a pomegranate balsamic. He calls me, and I'm going back and forth between Rockland and Brunswick all the time. So within a day or two, we'll have it here. But yeah, he's really done a nice job of offering it. Yeah.
I'm going to throw you a bone, which is that we're addicted to the maple balsamic, and it's great that you allow us to bring our empty bottles back and refill them. That's a really nice feature.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. Yeah, one of the things that we did was when you use one of our bottles, when you finish it, you just throw the cork away, wash and dry the bottle. When you think it's pretty dry, stick some paper towel in the neck and leave it. And then the next time you come in, you can have it filled with whatever you like. We take $1 off the price. We have a little frequent buyer card. For every 10 stamps, you get a bottle that size. Yeah. Yes.
You sell a Tunisian olive oil as well?
Occasionally. The Tunisian olive oil, if we can get it right from the grower or the producer in Tunisia, it's what we prefer to do. Unfortunately, what's happened, the Tunisian started the Arab Spring, whenever that, 5-6 years ago, I think, maybe. So what happened was, in the EU voided any sort of import tariffs or anything like that to give the Tunisian government, a chance to rebound and everything, and so they opened the door, they cut the taxes on the incoming oil from Tunisia, not just oil, all sorts of things. But unfortunately what happened was those that are unscrupulous started pushing adulterated oil and all this other stuff up through into the EU, and so all Spain, Portugal, and Italy went up in arms because all this bad oil is coming in now. They were all in when they were trying to help them bring the good oil in, but now, as it happens, we have to go directly to we can't deal with importers, we have to go directly to the source, and we have our best luck
Question.
that way.
Is Trump's trade war affecting the oil business at all, the importing?
Not at the moment. There's a bit of rumblings around the Spanish olives. We buy Spanish olives, and they're delicious. And I guess the United States buys $67 million worth of Spanish olives, but the Spanish are being faced with a 25% tariff that they're going to get hit with. So we've got a lot of, fortunately the shipment of Spanish olives arrived before all this other stuff is going on. So we'll have to wait and see. We hope not, because, yeah.
That doesn't, so from what you were saying though, the oil itself already has to, no one's shipping olives that get made into oil.
No. The oil has to be made right there, within hours of picking them. So when they make table olives, they pick the olives. You can't eat an olive off the tree because it's very bitter. It's just crazily bitter. But so what they typically do, the traditional way, is to put them in large barrels with water and sea salt, because all you're trying to do is get rid of the bitterness. And it takes sometimes 2 weeks, a month, 2 months, but that's how they do it.
I thought that olives were picked at different stages, that some are more green and some are riper.
They do. All of our extra virgin olive oil is picked when the olives are just before they're ripe. So they're green, a little spotted up with purple and things like that. The longer you let the olives sit on the tree, they ripen up, they get more oil in them. So you get more oil out of the olive the longer you wait. But the oil quality degrades, and to a point where, so for example, the green olives give you about 15 to 20% yield. A darker olive, 40 to 50%, that kind of thing. So unfortunately, a lot of times the growers are ready to harvest and they're excited about making great oil, but then the sort of the brokers for the big guys come in and they say, well, our price this year is X per liter. And then they have to make a determination, are we going to harvest now with a 20% yield and get that price, or are we going to wait a while and get more oil at that price to get more of our, ask. So it's tough. We have a Spanish cooperative that we work with that, again, Spain makes the most olive oil in the world, but this cooperative has figured out that if they wait probably 3 weeks into the harvest, they get more oil and it still comes in under the threshold of the extra virgin olive chemical analysis. And so we're buying that and we sell a lot of that to the restaurants. It doesn't have the big flavor that the extra virgin olive oils do, single varietals and stuff like that. It's more mellow because that's what happens over the time. You get more oil, it mellows the flavor a little bit. But they've worked it out so that they can get in 3-4 weeks in, harvest it, get more oil, and still meet the extra virgin olive oil criteria. And so we've been selling a lot of that to the restaurant. We can sell it to them at a lower price and that kind of thing. But it's not it wouldn't be the oil that we put out for, that you put in the bottles here. I mean, it's fine, but because we can get this other better oil, we choose to do that. Yeah.
So it looks like your bottles are brown.
They're brownish green. Yeah, it wiggles around sometimes. It's the pigment in the glass, but one of the things that they always do, they have these UV inhibitors that go into the mix of how they mold the glass. So what we tell people is keep them out of direct sunlight if you can, away from the heat, and you should be fine. You don't need to refrigerate either the oil or the balsamic.
We were on vacation to a small town in Spain, and it was a rental, and there was some leftover olive oil. It was really heavy, and I didn't like it. And I went to a little kind of grocery store, they have a little, I don't know what they call it, but going. And I didn't speak Italian, and I wanted something lighter. So they got somebody for me, and the choices were like unbelievable. And I was trying to express that I didn't want something heavy. So what was I looking at where it was really deep green and very heavy?
It was probably, a varietal of olive that gives that deep green juice. It probably was fresh, unfiltered olive oil. It was thick, almost milky, but green.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it was very, yeah.
Yeah, and it's a type of olive, like, I've got 2 of them here. One's from Italy and one's from Chile. That's brand new, and the Varnea is from Chile, and it's got its own distinguishing flavor. The Nostrana is probably going to be milder because the Nostrana
So
is
it's
made.
more of a personal taste kind of thing?
Yeah, and the varietal of olive,
And they did have lots.
Yeah, yeah, and they'll do that. And that's why we have probably 6 to 8 to 10 individual extra virgin olive oils every season, because people's tastes are different. People like really mild ones, or people like really big and robust, bitter tasting olive oil. Or you want to cook with different ones, because if you're cooking food that has a lot of flavor of its own, you use mild olive oil. If you like cauliflower, polenta, on baked potatoes, I use big, peppery, full-bodied extra virgin olive oils because I want the flavor. Because to me, cauliflower doesn't have any flavor.
You've got,
taste buds salivating all over the place. Thank you.
Thank you, sorry for that.